Yee. Welcome back to Ancient Future Incubators. This is our first future tripping part of the spectrum. We had an ancestry gathering last new moon. This is our first full moon. Just so happens that we've just moved through, it's an eclipsed full moon. So big invitations into big releases and ends, and big invitations into new paradigms. The planets are helping us, are pulling us into new paradigms. So that is exactly what Ancient Future Incubator seeks to hold space for. Is in between past and future, what needs to be released, digested, transformed, integrated, what needs to be reclaimed, refound, and brought into the future, what new evolutionary ways do we need to look for to move into the future that haven't been here yet. So what a beautiful thing that we've arrived here again during this eclipse season. It's a momentous moment. And Ashley comes in with the medicine of the Fool and bringing in some deep listening to the tarot and to the medicine of new beginnings. Here we are entering new season as well, and crossing the thresholds of Dia de los Muertos and Samhain, Hallows Eve, and the opening of the veil, going into this deep space of winter where, it's like what night is to night and day, winter is to a year. This is the time when the cosmos open up, when the dream time cosmos open up inside of us, because the focus is less on the external world, and because of the environmental circumstances of the earth, we're brought into ourselves more deeply if we're in temperate climate in northern hemisphere at least. So rich time of inward turning and transformation, of relational space, and new beginnings and endings. So I'm going to read the same quote that I started with last time, this Grace Lee Boggs quote, just to give us a little reminder of kind of what is potentially being asked of us in this time and in this space. The time has come for us to reimagine everything. We have to reimagine work and go away from labor. We have to reimagine revolution and get beyond protest. We have to think not only about change in our institutions, but changes in ourselves. We are at the stage where the people in charge of the government and industry are running around like chickens with their heads cut off or something else. And it's up to us to reimagine the alternatives and not just protest against what is and expect these people empowered to do better. We're at the point of a cultural revolution in ourselves and in our institutions that is as far-reaching as the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture 11,000 years ago, and from agriculture to industry a few hundred years ago. How do we reimagine education, community, family, sexual identity, gender? How do we reimagine justice? How do we reimagine economy? How do we reimagine all of these things, everything in the light of a change that is so far reaching? And that is our responsibility to make. We are at this precipice, this crossroad times, and we have to think beyond capitalist, white supremacist, heteronormative, patriarchal, extractive, Abrahamic categories. We can't expect the thinking that got us here to get us into a better place. We have to do the reimagining, and we have to call on the ancestors, and we have to call on the descendants, and we have to call on the group, the collective, because the smartest person in the room, in the group, is the group. So I'd say let's go with the Fool as our tarot card for today. I feel like that kind of got drawn to you through that podcast. Okay. I would like to sing a song and invite us to kind of connect to intention, connect to sacred, connect to ancestors, connect to descendants, kind of call in all those we need and want with us in this reimagining space. So the song is a Mashika song from the Mashika people, the Azteca people here of Turtle Island. And it's a song singing to Tonantzin, who is the sacred feminine principle in the cosmology there. Some, Guadalupe and Catholicism kind of got collaged on top of Tonantzin. So that painting that we see with the red and the blue and the star and the little brother who found her at the bottom, that's Tonantzin, colonial depiction of Tonantzin. Some people talk about Tonantzin being kind of divine, sacred, divine, feminine principle that shows up in any aspect of every deity. And some people talk about her as a deity that's kind of like the divine mother of the earth and of creation. Just inviting in this rebirth energy, the sacred feminine in this space to help guide, to help hold, to help carry what we need to birth. So while I sing, just inviting you to tap in and call in who you need to. Sing along if you like. We Tonantzin, Tonantzin, we Tonantzin, we Tonantzin, Tonantzin, we Tonantzin. Ipole no mangi toyo tasi, klaso kamati tonansi, we tonansi, tonansi, we tonansi, we tonansi. Tonantzin, we Tonantzin. Ipole no mani toyo lotatsi, klaso kamati Tonantzin. We Tonantzin, Tonantzin, we Tonantzin. We Tonantzin, Tonantzin, we Tonantzin. Ipole no mani toyo lotasi, klaso kamati Tonantzin. We Tonantzin. Tonantzin, we Tonantzin, we Tonantzin, Tonantzin, we Tonantzin. Ipole no mani toyo tasi, laso kamati Tonantzin. Ipole no mani toyo tasi, laso kamati Tonantzin. Moment there. Calling in the descendants from 7, 14, 8, 16 generations forward who are of the timelines where we have found ways to live in equity and harmony, to re-regulate ourselves with nature and return to the web of life in a good way. And calling in those who have found those ways in particular, who didn't need massive, mega violent, deathful transitions, if possible, where possible, where we somehow found ways to, where we find ways to change without having to be so forced to in such violence. We awaken in ourselves and follow calls where people and beings and things really call us all to this yearning for us all to be good here. Calling in the ancestors who know what we've been up to, both the whack ass shit and the beautiful things, and calling to be reminded and to have soul retrieval, and calling to also know very clearly what needs to be released or evolved or transformed or disrupted and all those things. Calling in medicine, especially from and for the indigenous parts of ourselves and our world, and indigenous peoples and the peoples closest to the earth and the peoples newest to these colonial projects, and the peoples clearest about what has actually been working and what has not. Would you like to vocalize any calling in of energies, of peoples, of ways, of prayers, qualities? Did you hear the question?
I was calling in my great grandparents and my grandparents by their names, and I was calling in their who they lived with in Ancona and in Sicily, and before that in Greece. And I was also calling in this giant list of people I wrote down today, just from these last 2 years of work that I want to like hold softer in my heart moving forward.
Who you want to hold softer in your heart?
Yeah.
Okay, folks, you got some beef with that you want to bring compassion
Yeah.
to? Okay.
Yeah. And not necessarily reconnect with, but just like be at peace within myself when I think of them.
I love that. Okay, dope, thank you. Okay. So I'm curious, as we connect to this spot between past and future, and as we kind of lean into future, I'm curious about kind of what is our sense of what's needed. And maybe that's kind of a contact point connected to the pain points here of something that's like, we know tangibly we need this shit. This can't be happening. This needs to be happening. And then I have kind of a more imaginative, visionary question of just like, in our wildest dreams, when we sit and listen to our ancient ancestors, and when we sit and listen to kind of anything being possible at this crossroads of this time being this great reimagining, where we made some major shifts from hunter-gatherer to agriculture, and in some strange ways that actually weren't better for us right away. You know, there was this huge decision to work all the time, to die more, to have more disease, to like live in a bigger society that's more anonymous and less concerned with our immediate needs. like in some abstract vision, and we flipped it. And I don't know how that went down, but we did. And then that to industrial revolution, which was kind of the same track, but just like when we lean into like, what if we flipped the way that we did from hunter gatherer to agriculture, and what would be like a out of the blue completely different way of being and as humans in this world. um, and then a third question of like, specifically, what are we sourcing from ancestry that we're wanting to call into future and present? So those are my kind of the questions I'm holding. Curious if you're bringing anything in particular that you want to get down with. I heard the beautiful intention of like moving forward into your personal future, softening the space that you hold. Some folks, yeah, and calling in your particular ancestors. Curious if you want to share any more about any of those things or anything else that you want to bring today.
Those are such big questions. And I felt myself being like, I don't know any of those answers, so I'm just here to listen. But then I thought about the Fool and
Yes.
and even thought about today. I was driving through fields in Yuma and saw people working and like picking the food and harvesting and just like realized I never see that. I never think about that. Mm-hmm. And so I think coming in here tonight, just really wanting to commit to expanding my perspective and yeah.
Okay, expanding our perspective, visibilizing the essential worlds that are such a part of our lives that have been invisibilized in some ways on purpose to hide the way that they happen to our moral sensibilities so that we continue to participate in them. Bringing that compassion to that world that's being more visibilized, embracing that I have no idea, and embracing like letting the I have no idea actually become an altar or a bed for possibility to arrive on. As soon as you said I have no idea, you then shared something. And that's often the case. Okay.
And I think also I was thinking a lot today this week about flipping what it means to be like to be intelligent or to hold wisdom, as I was spending time with people on my team whose life experiences are so different from my own and who know so much about like the systems that I've never been a part of, whether that's like CPS or prison or like all these different systems, and to hear someone say to me like she wants to study politics and policy and doesn't feel like she knows anything, but for me to feel like talking to her, I know
nothing. Yeah, so often folks who know so much will preface their like the dictionary of information with like, well, I don't know, but well, this person says this. If you think about this, we consider these things. And there's actually something deep to me about that of like, what's the classic parable of like one who knows something, no, they know nothing at all. And like something about actually it is wisdom to know that we have very little understanding of what's happening. We have such limited, we see 0.1% of the visible light. I mean, our visible light spectrum is 0.1% or something really crazy of the full light spectrum. Same with sound. There's like planes of existence. They're all around us that we're just not really, at least consciously experiencing. As one example of the ways that we know nothing.
Yeah.
Yet we can still name that, honor that, and know so much somehow. Do you know? And there's something in the medicine of the fool in that, where there's an invitation in that card to consider that when we are in a full state, that the universe will support us. And it's like, actually, when we really stop trying to know and have knowing be a way of limiting reality to that which what we know, so that we can control it, so that we can feel safe, whatever, blah, 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 we actually are opening ourselves to knowing, and knowing is not a static thing that we just like, boom, I know. It's actually a way of being, of like, I am listening and what I hear is this, you know, taking some possession and commodification and like private ownership from the last 11,000 years out of our way of experiencing information and sense of direct contact and what we're calling knowing. The Amazulu experience knowledge and wisdom as a being in and of itself that lives above a lake where there's a giant 3 mile tall quartz crystal, and when you receive wisdom, it's because wisdom is breathing, and so it's just like extending itself through the world. And it's not yours. It's not, nobody gets the keeper of wisdom in that way. It's like, oh, you got this breathing through you? Cool. You know, Ashwar wake up every morning, and anybody who speaks, drinks a purgative tea, talks about their dreams, and they base reality on what the dreams tell them is happening. You know, there are different ways of engaging with knowing that we don't have to be the owners of knowledge.
I feel like that practice of connecting over dreams would be in my dream future world.
Yes. Okay.
Like that being a normal thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Say more. Why does that resonate with you?
I guess because it feels so unknown, and but also so familiar, and like there's so much there to explore in me, for me, and so I can only imagine how much there is for other people to explore. And like, what if we actually share that? And it still feels magical and like other realm, and to bring that into this feels beautiful.
Yeah. Ashe, yeah. Like a world where the other realms are really woven as foundational parts of these worlds, where the places that are expansive are the places that we're kind of prioritizing and connecting through. Where there's magic, that way of kind of collective visitation of wisdom instead of personal ownership of wisdom.
And it feels too simple, but I dream of a world, I guess, where everyone's needs are met, and like everyone has the privilege and the space to heal. I guess spending time with people on my team this week and hearing about like trauma that I didn't even know how to hold, and then seeing them not have the time or ability or money or resources to be able to do anything with that, and just realizing like how much of a privilege it is to that I can make space and time and resource for that. Feels unfair.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's something about like equality, equity, fairness, the prioritization of everybody, specifically around like space. We all need so much fucking space to heal and process everything that has happened over the last 11,000 years at least.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I was just thinking thinking 10 years, but 11,000 years.
I would really love to see a good like 1,000-year stretch where somehow everybody has access to what they need in a real way, and society turns towards like let's set society for an indefinite amount of time prioritized around resting, deep listening, healing, um, following through any healing process that needs to happen. And then I think about I was just talking about Lars and the Real Girl. Were we talking about that?
I
Do you
don't
know
think
that
I've heard of
movie?
no.
It's what's that guy's name? Blonde hair. A lot of people felt like he was a big deal for a while. It's not very specific. Oh man, what's his name? I'm forgetting dude's name. He's a famous pretty boy star. And he has some trauma happen where he can't form real secure attachments and can't really do full-fledged relationships with anybody. And um, he gets to a point, Ryan Gosling, that's his name. He,
Oh.
he gets to a point where he orders what is meant to be like a sex doll, but he introduces his work and his his kind of his family to her as if she's a real woman. He says he met this woman, she's coming to town to stay, and it's his girlfriend. And folks are freaked out at first, and somehow they come. I'm gonna spoiler alert. This synopsis is more important than the movie itself, I think. And I'm not sure how much other people get this experience of the movie, but they decide to let him to go along with it. And so he gets to have this doll that's his girlfriend. And what ends up beginning to happen is part of their playing along with it is like, oh, okay, you want to have a girlfriend and you don't do relationships with people, friendships, like you just keep to yourself and you're, oh shit, something's cracking. You're trying to have a relationship and it's too much to do it with a full-fledged real person. So let's make her real. So they're like, knock on his door and they're like, yo, Betsy signed up to volunteer at the library for the next 4 hours. I'm coming to pick her up. And he's like, what the fuck? And then he has to deal with her being gone, not on his accord, but because she's got something to do. And so then they start having these experiences where she's got a real life. So then he has to deal with what comes up when you're with somebody who has a life. And so he gets to do his healing work before having to try and do it with a real human, with a community who helps him have a surrogate experience with a lot less pressure, who are playing along with his what we could call delusion and where he's at in his trauma healing.
Whoa.
So I imagine a world that in as part of this 1,000 years of rest, there's like folks arise to help folks play out whatever they need to play out as part of their healing with non-judgment and with the wisdom to create a container that meets them where they're at and helps them move towards where they're wanting to go and where we need them to go as a collective.
Wow. Huh. That makes me think of Carly's a part of a playback theater company. And it's such a cool concept. And like someone telling a story and then like this group of people arriving to like play it back and see it differently. But this feels like a future focused version of that. Or like a real time new experience.
4 months of immersive playback theater with a community centered around a certain set of playback.
Play forward, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, I like the idea of like lots of shit like that, like family constellation stuff where you're getting to, identify a need that involves your family or whatever. We could do collective family constellations as a whole for the next 1,000 years. And like, let's think about the last 11,000 years and all the trauma that happened and what we kind of got set in. And let's do a collective family constellation for, the founding fathers of the United States and Hitler and the indigenous people and like all these major players and the major transition points that set us down particular roads, the Roman Empire and like whatever. And let's collectively kind of like look at what are the energetic, constellatory, karmic wounds that the collective are holding, and let's take those shapes and let's play them out, and then let's find the healing orientations to all these different parts. Constellation.
Oh. That feels like such an overwhelming amount of
I know
information.
certain groups of people can be responsible for holding that in attuned ways. Maybe we let like mountains and like bodies of land be the constellation holders, the what do they call them, the channels, or particular word for the people that show up to play the roles. Whoa.
Wow. That makes me think of in Octavia's Brood, in the collection of short stories, there's one that is about how in the future, like only a couple people remember everything, and they can like see in a moment like all the history and past people and places and actions that took place there, and everyone else is just living these like almost Lego lives. And it feels like it would be extreme, but I wonder what a future would be like where like everyone had that deep level of memory.
Yeah. It makes me feel like you've got to have that memory and like something that really roots you in the present so that you're not experiencing so you're not getting lost in all the experience. We would have to be calibrated. I mean, there's a way that we're like that already. We're just talking about a way wider aperture, right? Where you go to a place that you've seen before and you have these moments of like, oh, I remember that I had dinner with that person for the first time at that restaurant. And oh, dang, remember when that thing happened at that intersection? And like, and we're not trying to do that necessarily. It just comes to us. And so we are within our scope. We have that experience regularly. So we're just talking about opening the aperture. Yeah. So there's like us, the 1,000 years spending time with the Akashic records and setting us as beings who are kind of in tune and experiencing, immersed in the Akashic records.
What are the Akashic records?
Where does that come from? Akashic sounds Sanskrit. I'm imagining it. I don't even want to make that up. Akashic records. I'm not sure which modality holds this term, but it's the idea that the Akashic is like what you said, like everything ever is present all the time. And you can go into the Akashic records as like the place, the dimension where the layers of happenings are stored and accessible. And so there are, many indigenous peoples lived in the Akashic records as a society in the way that it was not about, we live in a society that's like in ideation, fuck tradition, let's go get, like, let's evolve and get better. But it's still very much confined to like within this container. But there's a way that there was this like, a griot in West Africa was responsible, was like the counselor to the king or queen, and held the entire history of that clan, tribe, nation, and knew the history of each person. And that's why they were the counselor and the mediator. Anything came up, they'd go and they'd be like, bro, do you know your great grandfather? Da, 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 da. And actually, this is probably a rift that's connected to this person's great grandmother because this happened and da, 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 da. And like, let's get the huge context of who you are, my friend, and what this might be about. And it was through holding that Akashic record that made them the specialist that could tend to people's relationships, that could counsel the leadership of the society, and they were also the person that held. They had to do it through. They kept all of that through story and song as a way of making it accessible to everybody else. And so there's this like, you know, the keeper of the Akashic records and the presenter of the Akashic records through art, which is one of the ways that we can connect to the Akashic records because we're in that brain, and the right brain is where we can kind of travel between worlds. I like what
That
you.
made me think of the everything everywhere all at once, not in a really profound way, but like
Yep.
something about that.
Yep. And I was just about to say, I like the way that you brought in like a really tangible, close thing to you. Like I want more, what'd you say? Warmth, gentleness, kindness
Oh,
towards the people in your heart, softness. And for me, there's something about if we're really actually in tune with the the breadth of experience throughout the Akashic records, we've got to have that. That's got to bring us to compassion and to like a softness. You know, it's like, it's been going down out here. It's wild, and we've all been pulled into it in different ways, and it's really hard to point one finger anywhere. And you know, we can definitely point some fingers at what's happening now, but like that happened to them, and why that happened to them, and who actually did it, and what was going, we don't even know. So there's just a like, yo, back to that fool of just like if I'm actually holding everything that I can that I do know about, I've got to turn towards softness and humility. I've got to turn towards a not knowing and a like life. You tell me, because I just got here. You know, yeah. What do you think? What kind of societal mechanisms might support us in making some of these turns or sustaining some of these turns?
I just kind of saw like the tower card at first, just like something's gotta have to burn. It gotta be released first. And then I got a little stuck there.
Then, yeah, maybe we can't see beyond that point.
Do you have ideas?
Well, just that makes me think of Martin Practel, who talks about, who's the grief and praise guy, who talks about um, who was welcomed into, as an indigenous European cat who grew up in an indigenous nation in Mexico, who ended up in Guatemala as a young man and was initiated into the Zahutel Mayan clan, and had family with them and became a leader in that community until the 80s, when we were trying to secure the global free trade market, and we sent death squads down there in Contras and wiped out his village and a lot of that way of life to create our exports and puppet governments. Um, and he talks about the Zahutel Mayan build their houses in such a way that they fall apart once a year. Because if the houses didn't fall apart, then they wouldn't need repair. And if they didn't need repair, then the community wouldn't come together once a year to rebuild the whole village, basically. And it's that rebuilds the community appropriately based on kind of what that season has revealed as needed and as wanting to be grown. And so there's like built in, we can think about that as planned obsolescence, except not to get more money from you, but to bring us together to like check back in and be like, how do you want your house to be now? Everybody. Cool, let's all build them together. You help me with mine, I help you with yours. And so there's some like mutual need is actually important. And we're trying to get away from that in this society. And there's actually like things that need sustaining and that need us to be oriented around sustaining them together through mutual need is actually essential to keep a community together. So that makes me think of the tower card. It's like we're over here like we're doing this weird ass shit of like, I want to live forever, let's make this go forever, while we're also like, let's build shit as crappily as possible so that we can make money.
Yeah.
Such a mind fuck.
Oh, and that feels so much healthier in relationship with the earth instead of just let's build all these forever things.
Yeah, my boy Daniel Rekschaffen, who is a mindfulness and education teacher, and also a student of Martin Prechtel and a Hebrew brother, and in his kind of reconnecting to Judaism and in his reconnecting to European indigeneity with Martin Prechtel, who's a deep history keeper, who's a griot, who helps white folks come back to like, you're not white. Actually, check out this whole vast, rich lineage you're connected to, and look at the process of stealing that from you, and let's get back. Daniel has been spending a lot of time thinking about little apocalypses instead of a big apocalypse. And the way that in indigeneity there is this built-in cycle, right? You come to the harvest season and you're supposed to, like, the richest indigenous person is the one who gives away the most, not the one who has hoarded the most, right? Like if we're gonna play egoic games of abundance, it's really about look how much I gave away and how little I have at the end of it. As a way of like honoring the flow of abundance, honoring the abundant nature of nature, and the one who can embody that the most and be closest to that nature is actually the one who is richest. And so there's kind of this built-in process of like every certain amount of time you go through a cycle of giveaway because you don't want to accumulate too much because that would actually be against nature. And in Judaism, there's this idea of Jubilee where every certain amount of time, all debt is supposed to be forgiven. And maybe it's like by the state or by landholders, or like there's some process that in old times, every 7 years, every 40 years or something, like debt is forgiven. Folks are supposed to give their land back and then it gets redistributed. Like there was all these old processes that I need to learn more about, but that were like, you can't accumulate for too long. You've got to redistribute.
Wow.
Yeah. And initiation, that makes me think about initiation, right? Like we're supposed to go through these periods in our life where we become something different. And there has to be a death for that thing to happen. And there has to be a rebirth, and that has to be intentional and guided by those who are on that other side. And we don't have a lot of that unless we belong to a very particular thing in this world.
And then that gives you the opportunity to restart a new cycle as the Fool.
Yep, exactly.
That makes me think too about just like the ways we live together and how, like, from the book How We Show Up, like hearing about the family unit as like just an extension of hyper capitalist individualism, and to break that and like actually live with more people, like with community, and just share responsibility and resources and take care of each other and yeah, experience new ways of living.
Yeah.
It feels so simple, but also so obvious. Like, why can't we do that? People are doing that, I guess, and it happens.
Okay, so in the future, what happens in our futures that we're imagining? What happens to the people? Maybe there's not. Okay, so seems like the stories are that throughout time there are people who are inclined towards gathering power and using it for their particular agenda. That seems like a thing that we do as humans in a particular way, and the way that nature does. We have this idea, at least from the lens that I've been told, and that could be totally wrong, right? Like there's a lot of ways that survival of the fittest is a very fragmented, perverted, limited way of thinking about the way that nature works, because it's also so symbiotic. But it seems like, all over the world, there were folks who rose into empire, who killed a bunch of people, who used violence to be like, nah, nigga, we doing it like this. And, so how does that energy live in our imaginary, the futures we're calling in here? Do you have any ideas or senses about that?
I don't know how it lives, but I just keep thinking it needs to be like healed or transformed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the older I get, the more curious I get about this, and I've definitely grew up feeling that way of like, the only hurt people, these people are hurt people. Is this just a collective trauma that's being passed through, and that's why it's always here?
Mm.
Is this part of our nature? What part of what we're talking about is part of our nature, and what part has to be expressed, and what part can be expressed in different ways? Yeah. Is it something that we can reach that maybe we never have? I have some sense that there's been times on Earth where there's been a lot more equity and collective concern, and not so much concentration of power, at least not in the same way, but it's hard to know.
Do you think about like the inner equity coaching work that you do with individuals? Like, do you map that onto the collective and think about like the person who's wanting all this power is just a part of you that.
Yeah, they're definitely, the way that I experience the world is connected to the way that I do this work, but maybe not as explicitly or as in depth as you're talking about. Yeah, it would be really cool to like do a map of like what are the major kind of energies, minds, paths that are happening right now. It's like reclamation of like land back and space for all people, and like all this is kind of coming up while there's also land grab, and like these folks who are accumulating way more and more and more and more, and that number is getting smaller and everything's getting concentrated up, and then what are the specifics of like who are the major players who are holding big leverage in that, and yeah. That would be really interesting to really like map out. Are you seeing something?
I was thinking like, yeah, the question you always ask of like, who's here? What do they need? What are the stories they're telling?
Yeah.
What purpose are they trying to serve?
Yeah.
Those get harder to answer thinking about some of those pieces.
Right. Yeah. But that's a really beautiful and deep application. You know, it makes me think like, all right, so US kind of power paradigms here, really hyper focused on this word freedom, on on like this word, you know, I don't know, depends on where you look, but like we're in this like I'm me, I'm supposed to be able to do whatever I want. It's up to me and I'm supposed to be able to like figure it out and create this designer experience. And I'm supposed to work hard, and I might also be supposed to not be happy until I die, and there's a place I'm supposed to go when I die. That I'll find that there's like all these mixtures, but a lot of them are like they're outward and they're away, they're elsewhere, you know, and they're hyper here at the same time. It's a strange. I feel like we have a lot of cognitive dissonance of like it's about me, but me is almost always about like getting something, having something, experiencing some static idea that will finally dot dot dot. And a lot of that feels like I'm curious if we've been in a swing out of the trauma of being in more collective experiences, because the folks who I talk to who have grown up in the United States but come from really collective families and cultures, they appreciate individuality in a way a lot where there's like you don't even know what it's like to have a whole family that's like the only template is this one, and if you don't do it you might not belong in our family anymore, kind of vibe. And there's a way that, you know, maybe there was a need that arose for like this is suffocating and I want to be able to follow something else and experiment and like have a different experience, and I'm feeling the tyranny and the violence in the way that this collectivism is, and we know that that's deeply directly coming out of feudalism and coming out of, you know, Roman Empire that then birthed into these nation states, empire that turned into nation states that, you know, came from feudalism. So there's like watching Game of Thrones really helped me understand why we are where we are now. Just like, damn, we were coming from something like that. Oh, okay, this does sound better.
Wow.
You know, just like that was horrible. And it's a lot like now. It's just the, you know, the upper middle class and the low ruling class are the lords, and the billionaires and the oligarchs are the oligarchs, and you know, we're the peons, you know, and we have a little bit different sense of we could move up through those ladders if we play that game right, but only a very few, because that's how that rule works. It's still got to operate like an oligarchy essentially. You know? And so there are these
Wow.
ones that we're like running from and pushing against and replicating, and those who have had the most power in that, it replicates their particular trauma the most, and it doesn't work for folks who don't have that same trauma because we don't need that shit. We're not playing that Lars and the Real Girl game, you know. This is that
Yeah.
Lars and the Real Girl game of like, God damn it, Queen King, I need freedom. Everybody should be able to be rich. And then once those motherfuckers got rich, they were like, nah, fuck that. We want to hold this shit.
Right. Freedom for me and no one else. Like, or only people like me.
Right. And that's actually way more narrow than I'm going to tell you it is, because I want people like me who are close enough like me to feel like they could get here so they'll stay hooked in this abusive relationship. Mm.
Wow.
I like that. In our 1,000 years of rest, we are very clear and we prioritize getting clear about what is the collective trauma that we're playing out, and what are the healing pathways that are actually about healing the trauma and not continuing to play it out.
When you said pendulum or are we swinging back too far? Something. I got the image of like when you have a pen and it's like swinging back and forth and it's kind of coming in on itself like a spiral then. And just feeling like, how do we not, is there a way to swing back and to regulate somehow without it feeling like maybe it is a spiral? That's not a bad thing.
Right, because pendulum is doing this and it's spiraling at the same time, or you're talking about like when the pendulum gets to the smaller point, it starts spiraling.
Oh, I guess I was kind of merging the two, but yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how pendulums work. But there's something deep, like pendulums is about something about the string, and there's like the laws of physics at play somehow cancel out some forces, so it's like a truer representation of the relationship between the sphere that is the pendulum and the forces of nature that are operating on it. It's like somehow fully surrendered to those forces or something. And so there's something in what you're saying makes me curious about like how we do. We often respond to, you know, so much of our process is being impacted by something and then responding to that something, rather than being impacted by that something and knowing what we are committed to inside of ourselves and what our practice is with life in general, and utilizing that orientation and those practices to move that thing that we're impacted by through our system while staying in integrity with where we are located. You know, it's like I used to work with kids in juvie, and they'd be like, if somebody calls me a name, I ain't gonna be no punk. I'm gonna jump in with them. And I'll be like, wait, okay, so you tell me that you're here in the unit, you know, if you get into a fight, you're gonna get into trouble. You're having things that you want taken away from you. And that's not being a punk, is letting somebody pull you into that you don't want. That seems like you got punked into where they were and what they wanted to engage with you through, instead of staying where you were. I'm confused. And you know, it feels like that, where it's like, how do we intake these massive forces of nature that are, you know, these mega corporations, or these ways, these paradigms that we stay with for millennia, you know, while also staying in ourselves and oriented in actually what our praxis is and what our dimension, the dimension we're living in, where our everything everywhere all at once belongs. You know, how do we put the fucking, how do we respond to oppression by cracking its back so it's like, oh, wow, you know, how do we put the silly eyes on that moment, that scene where she's like embraced her husband's medicine, she's like embraced the meaninglessness or the meaningfulness that is really coming from her uniquely, you know, and is able to no longer engage as enemy, but see all the dimensions and give them what they most want, that's being expressed in that dimension, that particular way, you know? Yeah.
Wow.
That's a really good question. Mm-hmm.
And thinking about that spiral, I was thinking too, like how are we trying to calibrate to like something perfect? Like, no, probably not, but are we trying to stay in the chaos? And then I was remembering the podcast just now about the Fool. She was talking about chaos and change. And I forget exactly what she said, but something like they're not bad, obviously, in that like we can be part of shaping change, and unless we embrace change and are part of it, it's gonna shape us, and it still will, but we're not always its victim.
Right. And there's, yeah, I mean, so much of even having to say that is how much we experience being the victim of change because of where change is coming from, right? And so much of that is the narratives we have around it, right? And so like, and I love your question about like dynamic peace or balance, or like I don't think we're actually talking about hoping that the earth is only this one way, this like heaven on earth all the time, where everything's perfect, where it's like just this. And so part of what we're talking about is like, yeah, how do our societies, how do our narratives, how do our forms hold all these different aspects of life in a way that doesn't create more suffering, that doesn't create systemic suffering for some and systemic benefit for some, where it's like, nah, like resources, the weather, the seasons, the nature of the earth is going to change. It does that. My Pomo homies know the cave that they've gone to for the last 5 Earth Age changes, and that's where they'll go. And it looks like it's coming again soon. It's not a big deal for them because in their narrative, it's like, nah, it doesn't matter how much time, but there's been different Earth Ages, and there was the fire time, and during the fire time, we went into the cave, and it was 65 degrees, and we ate the moss and the insects, and we lived there for a few generations until the earth saw fit to like it was right for us to live above surface. And then when it froze over, we did the same thing, and it was the same 65 degrees, and we had water and food. And so there's like what tower moments do we need to have for our expectations and for the frames that we have right now that make this so hard to digest because it just does not fit in our frames? And how do we actually celebrate that what is happening is these miserable frames are being cracked open because it cannot be held, or we can't be tricked into their truth anymore? And so there's just a like, actually, how do we let these crossroads, the emergence in the emergency be for our benefit? And it also struck me, you said like the solace in chaos and change can be our own agency in it. And I also want to know, how do we hold stories for when it's bigger than our agency? Or how do we locate our agency for things like earth age shifts when we might not be able to change the conditions of the whole earth, but we might be able to find a cave, and a worldview that holds that as a beautiful part of the process of being a people on earth. Um, yeah. Mm. It's about that time. In this realm where there is a sequential clock and calendar. You have anything else? Anything you'd like to close with or share before we close?
When you opened it, I wrote down in really big words, big release and reimagine everything.
Big release and reimagine everything?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then what about a 0?
Oh, and then I also drew a big 0.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, the 0, that neutral, that empty space, that like the point where matter comes in and out of being. Yeah. This season being season of emptying.
And I guess the 0 is where the big release and the opportunity to reimagine everything are always kind of together.
I like that.
Reimagine and or remember.
Yep. 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 I just saw a fool carrying their knapsack, but the knapsack was the zero.
It was a zero.
Mm.
In the podcast, she was saying the fool, whatever they're carrying is supposed to be like the bare minimum to really let go of what's heavy and only carry what makes you lighter and what brings out your light.
Nice, yo. That giveaway, that practice makes me think about the octopus. So like a 2-ton octopus can fit through a space as small as its beak, a quarter, but only if its tentacles are empty or it's carrying a quarter or smaller. Yeah, yeah.
Pass through the zero.
Exactly. Yep. It could fit through the zero, but yeah. And that as like caterpillar to butterfly, that as like death to new life. Like you can't take, even if they bury that shit with you, you're leaving that body behind and you're taking a new body. And so, yeah, that like actually embrace a new body and only carry with you what you can take with what travels between bodies. Mm. All right, Eclipse. I see you.
It's been beautiful for the last 2-ish hours. I've just been driving towards the moon, and it's been so beautiful. Another zero.
That's right. Mm.
Oh, wow.
All of them.
Wow. I thought this was some kind of handshake we were doing.
That too, that too. No. Okay. Thank you for this rich exploration.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. My pleasure. Great to get to talk with you this way. Give thanks to all of your lineage that came, to that softness you called in, to all of the helpers and ancestors, to all the descendants, to the future worlds and realms and pathways, to all of the medicine that we spoke out loud today, remembered and discovered, and may all of it that resonates with a good way forward be sent to it. We dedicate the merit to this future that is unfolding now in the confluence of the present, so that all beings may be happy, free, in peace, in wisdom, in integrity, in alignment, together, and each of us. Offer just a short little song, traveling song for the folks to go home to. Thank you for coming. May you come again when we call. May we come when you call. And may our calls be for the benefit of all in a really good way. Okay, just, oh, this one will be with the fire. And this one we can balance with the divine masculine. And I believe that this is Dene, but I'm not sure. Navajo, Dene. Learned it from my brother Jared from the Native American Church, from TP singing. Yo we know ene ene 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 yo we know na ene yo yo we know ene ene yo we know yo we know ene ene 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 yo oh na ene yo. Oh. Oh shit. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you again soon. Have a beautiful journey home.
Thank you. Bye.
Peace.